matters most is how well you walk through the fire. To die on a kitchen floor at 7 o'clock in the morning while other people are frying eggs is not so tough, unless it happens to you. I met a genius on the train today, about 6 years old. He sat beside me, and as the train ran down along the coast, we came to the ocean. And then he looked at me and said, "It's not pretty." It was the first time I'd realised that. Hey, Gary here. Welcome to Book Mob episode 27. Now, today I'm going to be talking about poetry. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't think poetry gets enough poetry is something that many of us can relate to in the words, and obviously because there's thousands and thousands of poets, thousands of books, you have to choose very wisely as to the poet that turns you on. But in the sense that, so Charles Bukowski, this is I think a 2017 release of what basically the essential Charles Bukowski. So I think there's 90 poems or something that the editor had spent so much time going through all his works. I mean, apparently Bukowski had written up to 5,000 poems. And apart from his novels and his public performances and his jottings, so this man was he was prolific to the nth degree. I think Bukowski as a poet should be read and digested by young people who have never really been made aware of the power of words, of how an individual can, in a couple of sentences, just put something into your mind where you go, you know what, I recognize that. I recognize what he's saying or she is saying. And for instance, let me quickly read something that, what do you think about this, all right? Born into hospitals which are so expensive that it's cheaper to die. Into lawyers who charge so much it's cheaper to plead guilty. Into a country where the jails are full and the madhouses closed. Into a place where the masses elevate fools into rich heroes. Now, that's from Dinosauria We, written in about 1993, 1 year before Bukowski's death. Now, can you hear the meaningful understanding that he had of contemporary society? Bukowski was Bukowski was born in Germany, but to an American and German mother, and he moved the father returned the family to the USA in the 30s, but he basically grew up in the United States. But can you understand how Bukowski basically hit on everything that concerns, I'm not going to say it's not the working person, but basically how everything is out of reach, even though we're told that everything is under control and everything is designed for the masses to have access to. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, I think young people would really gain a lot from reading Bukowski, and I just want to say that a good place to start, if you're a young reader and you want to sort of settle into poetry, you want to find out what poetry is about, you want to get some resonance in your life, you want to get some meaning in your life, I would suggest that you start with Burning in Water, Drowning in Flame, 1955 to 1973 poems by Charles Bukowski. That was published in 1974, and I've got a copy here somewhere, but I'm sure it's available because his work has not stopped being published since he died in 1994. Now, the funny thing about Charles Bukowski is that he is a myth in the making. the downtrodden, the drunk, the alcoholic, in bad health, writing from Skid Row, writing from the gutter. When in fact, I think Charles Bukowski, he's the myth of the man, he played into that. He only became pretty well known and successful in his 50s. Up until then, he had lived a transient life. He worked at the post office for quite a long time. And all this time he was writing. The guy wrote non-stop. He sat down, he put pen to paper and just vomited forth feelings, thoughts, ideas. And I think, to me, he's, I personally have fallen for the myth of Bukowski because I didn't know him. So I'm only getting what I see that comes in. For instance, in 1987, there was a film made called Barfly with Mickey Rourke. And I think Bukowski actually helped or wrote the script. And it's about a barfly. A barfly is someone who's just, an alcoholic. And I think that created this sort of charming image of the alcoholic poet, when in fact the reality must be very, very different. Living, day to day, drinking rather than eating, being stuck in a horrible sort of sense of hopelessness and loss. Whereas I think because Bukowski was, when he became well known, he became a celebrity. Everyone who would, people who would not given him a second look passing on the street, he would have just been one of the other bums and hobos and drunks, lying around Los Angeles streets, vomiting and shitting in public. But when he became popular, he became, I guess, a celebrity for the very people that Bukowski enjoyed writing scorn on. And suddenly he became invited to parties. He was on talk shows. This is in the, I guess, in the 70s and 80s. But what I'm saying is that a man who for decades wrote and created novels, poems, narratives, public speaking, slang poetry, if you wish. And he created a whole genre of down and dirty sort of, poets living in the gutter. Whereas I think he didn't, he lived like that because he had to. That's the life he chose to live. He always talks about the poor suckers, in his words, the poor suckers who work 9 to 5 and are paying off a car, paying off a house, looking after children. And at the same time, he's trying to say, look, you guys are being suckered by the aristocracy who are just taking your time, your life. And at the end of the day, and this has got nothing to do with politics. It's not about communism or socialism. It's the fact that Bukowski obviously had a very creative mind. And he was an educated man, self-educated for the most, but he did go to college for 2 years. And he spent many, many, many hours and years at the Los Angeles Public Library. And he wrote a poem about that when the library was burnt down. Okay, so where am I going with this, okay? Yeah, so Bukowski, born in 1920, lived through the Depression as a boy. Lived through the Second World War, though he did not serve as a soldier, mainly because of his background as a German. Or his mum was German and his dad married a German woman after the First World War, but also because he was quite sickly. I think he was graded what they call in America 4F, meaning that he wasn't worthy to be a soldier. So he spent so much time living a transient life. And he wrote and he wrote, and he got so many rejections that he gave up writing for about 10 years, where he just then worked in hundreds of different types of jobs. He did some jail time, I think for vagrancy or drunkenness. He lived in this sort of extremely, insecure lifestyle where money was scarce, where everything was directed towards booze and trying to just live day to day. And I think after a decade of not writing, he started he got wind of the cultural change in America in the late 50s, early 60s, and he started sending his poetry and his stories into, at that time you could send stories around to various magazines. Lots of, and then basically this is the birth of fanzine, where anyone can really, if they put the work and the effort in, anyone can start their own magazine, their own, so even through all that, he wasn't being paid in any money, so he continued to work. And I think that in his early 50s, after he'd written thousands of poems, he was approached, and many of them were published in magazines and these fanzines. So he was, he had a presence. He had a commercial presence as well, because it was the right time. Because the madness of the 60s kind of opened up the world for talented, creative people. Now, Bukowski always talks about how he gets letters from, and again, in his words, losers who say, I know exactly what you mean. I live this kind of life. I drink. I have shit jobs. I go from city to city. And Bukowski would always go, well, why are you writing to me? I mean, what is it that, don't waste money on a postage stamp writing to me, because I just don't care. So Bukowski is working at the post office, and he gets approached by a publisher of a small publishing press. I think it was called Black Ink Publishing or something like that. And so he got published, and they were going to pay Bukowski to quit his job, pay him enough money for booze and typewriter ribbon and rent, and give him a universal basic income. And in a month, he has said that he felt so chuffed by the fact that someone had put their faith in him, that in a month he wrote a novel. And that novel is called Post Office, which I've obviously read, and I mean, it's fantastic. You go out there, find the novel, read it, and from then on, his presence grew in the media. On talk shows, he would drink and cause trouble, and anytime the myth of Bukowski was, this crazy eccentric. When people got close to him and met him, suddenly they discovered that he's just a person. He's a man. He's a boorish man. He's a drunk. He pisses people off. And most of the time, people wanted to believe the myth. And this is the beauty of poetry, because poetry creates real worlds that are kind of mythical. Even if you're talking about some of his poems where he talks about living the low life, when you read them, and I did as a young man, you kind of had this call. You think, this is the way to go. Now look up here. This is my writings from 1985 to 1988, and it's all because of Charles Bukowski. Because I figured that the only way for people, hold on. Mean. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, I believe the myth that if you wrote, people would read, which is, not true. Because if you write crap, no one's going to read it. The difference between, say, me and Bukowski is that he had a beautiful mind, he had a creative mind, and he was able to produce gorgeous poems, succinct poems. He knew, he wasn't pretending. That's the difference. I think I would have to say I was pretending to be Bukowski, even though I wasn't living the high life, but I thought through the myth of Bukowski that I could also become a Bukowski type sort of figure. And that was a great lesson for me. I mean, it took me years to understand that. And at the time, if someone said, "Oh, you're nothing," I would have gone, "Ah, bullshit. I know what I'm doing." But what I'm saying is, Bukowski was authentic. He was sincere. The myth, he didn't create the myth. The media, the elites, the movie directors, the actresses, the rich, the wealthy, they're the ones that created this myth about the starving author who drinks booze and lives this really scummy life, when in fact, Bukowski, you get the feeling that Bukowski wanted to elevate himself out of the poverty that he lived most of his life in. He wanted to become more than just a bum who was drinking. I mean, he would have loved it if he could just drink and have money and pay the rent and have girlfriends. And the one thing about the one thing that Bukowski talks about that is close to my heart is that he was very aware of his physical repulsiveness. I mean, he considered himself extremely ugly. He had bad manners. He had facial scarring from youthful pimple breakouts that were never really treated. So he grew up being on the outside, being sort of sent to the worst parts of the world. And when he became famous, he suddenly found that women were inspired by his poetry and would knock on his door and say, "Hello, can I come and meet you," so to speak. And if you look at his romantic life, when he actually met someone that came close to him as a human, he really, really loved them. And he really, really appreciated the affection and the love. And he did have tragedy. One of his closest lovers for a long time, she died, and Bukowski went into a deep depression. And throughout this whole process, he continued to write, which is the magic of the man. Now, when he wanted to understand the world, once he got lifted from the gutter, say, onto the stage, he took it in his stride. Bukowski, I guess he must have known that there was this myth growing about him, which I might add continues to grow. And he said, basically was saying, "I've been giving for 50 years and I'm getting nothing. Now it's my turn to get something for my work, for my words." So he wrote, he performed, he went on, he did everything he could to make money and to lift himself up from the poverty that he had been living for most of his life. And I guess he's cynical, and that's where he becomes, humorous and funny, because he knows that people only like him, women will only sleep with him because he's been discovered as this sort of, sort of street level poet genius, when in fact he was just a man who enjoyed creative writing. He enjoyed talking about the world. He enjoyed the world and would interpret the world through, booze and taking the time to understand his feelings and try and interpret them and put them into words so that other people could understand not what he was going through, what we're all going through. So I think there was something in that sense of Bukowski where he was just simply telling the story of his time, his period, by any means necessary. Now, I just want to read. So, I like that one. Hold on. So, what do we got? Okay. I don't know why I didn't do this before, because I can just edit. I don't know why, you don't have to worry about fucking. Okay, we've read that one. Bukowski spent a lot of time on his own. He was desperate for company, for love, for affection, like many of us are. He would have loved to have had not necessarily a family, but he wanted very much to be loved and taken care of by a partner, by a woman, by a girlfriend, even by a wife, because I think he married twice in his life. This poem, written in 1983, is called Oh Yes. There are worse things than being alone, but it often takes decades to realize this. And most often, when you do, it's too late. And there's nothing worse than too late. So my point again, this is the essential Bukowski. My point again is that I think poetry can offer calmness, recognition, joy, an understanding of the world. And through all that, when you read something out of, his thousands of poems, you can say to yourself, I understand that. That makes sense. It resonates. And for all his work, I didn't know Bukowski until I was, 20, whatever. But I think, and even then, this is 1985, 86 when I found out about him. Back then, there was no internet, obviously, and finding out about people was purely by chance, because I didn't go searching. I must have read, or someone introduced me to him, or there was something going on that gave me the lucky break where I discovered this man called Charles Bukowski. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I think young people, 15 years and up, that reading Bukowski's poetry is an education. It would really open the eyes of of course, what do you think in 2023? Whenever you read sort of critical analysis of Bukowski's work, it's always demeaning his character. It's always labeling him misogynist, racist, nasty, and to me, it seems like a pointless exercise to break down someone, 20 years after they're dead, and to sort of try and destroy the power and the creative output of a single man. Don't forget, a man that lived on the margins of society for over 50 years, who lived day to day on looking for $1, $2, $5 to find somewhere to sleep or find a booze to drink, to smoke. And through all of that, that's how Bukowski grew and somehow cracked the commercial market. And when I mean commercial market, I mean people recognized Bukowski's talent and his creative output and said, we can make money from this guy, which is sad, but there's nothing wrong with it, because it lifted Charles Bukowski from the gutter to the apartment. And Bukowski knew this even once he became well known, or almost famous, because he was well known in the USA in certain circles, but he was actually very, very famous in Germany and France, because they understood the character type. Now, since Bukowski has passed, the myth has just grown exponentially out of order of his life. And I did say earlier on, I fell for the Bukowski myth myself when I was younger, but I grew out of it, and now I just appreciate his words, and I can read his poetry, his novels, with pure pleasure, not for any insight into my life. I just love the way he uses words, the way he expresses ideas, and again, if you're a 15-year-old kid and you want to try poetry, because it's very hard to get. I'm a former teacher, so I kind of know that poetry is a dirty word, but I really do think that if young people got hold of his poetry and gave it a good look, they would find something worthy in his words. Okay, that's just okay. And again, this is the freedom of YouTube. It's what I feel, it's an opinion. There's no merit in what I'm saying. I'm just saying that people can enjoy poetry of all levels, and I'm pointing out that Bukowski is someone who is accessible and available and will deliver the goods. So before I go, I'll just read one more poem, or one more bit of one more poem, because I want to end on a high note. I think I've read that one. Okay. One last poem before we go. I couldn't find the date for this poem, but I guess it was the 60s. That's just from the style. Okay, it's called Destroying Beauty. A rose, red sunlight. I take it apart in the garage like a puzzle. The petals are as greasy as old bacon and fall like the maidens of the world, backs to the floor. And I look up at the old calendar hung from a nail and touch my wrinkled face and smile because the secret is beyond me. All right. So, essential Bukowski, something for the touts, the nuns, the grocery clerks, and you. Give it a go. See how you go. And thanks for joining us. And next week I've got a special episode of Book Mob. I will be having a discussion with a young reader, and I'll be asking him questions about what books he reads, how he enjoys reading, and what can be done to make younger people enjoy the reading experience. Okay, thanks for that, and I'll see you soon. Bye.